You are listening to the 5 Squared Podcast, the podcast where we bring you tips for your business and your life. Our goal is to leave you smarter with ideas, wisdom, tools, and entertained. The 5 Squared Podcast is produced weekly for your enrichment. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can also follow me on Twitter at 5 Squared and Facebook. All the links are in the show notes. Now let's get started with your host, business consultant, executive coach, and founder of 5 Squared, Tim Fives.
Hello, this is Tim Fives with the 5 Squared Podcast. I think this is episode 17 or 18. I don't have my notes right in front of me, but hope you're doing well. Yesterday we had a fantastic event partnered with Operum HR and Amanda King, where we hosted an event at the Box Hill Mansion at Regents Glen. It was a fantastic venue, beautiful evening for some networking and whatnot. So thanks for all of you that showed up. I think it was a fantastic event. We are launching our summer series for small business owners that is really focused on kind of a business in a box model, if you will, and we call it our Business Made Simple series, obviously. So we have a lot of great content coming up for that over the next 2 months. Takes us to the end of July, so stay tuned on that. But I thought I'd go over what we talked about a little bit yesterday with the group, and specifically about leadership. And there's 4 traits of leadership that every successful leader has. Now, they may have more than these 4, but we're going to start with these 4 because they're fundamental. And the first one's humility, integrity, accountability, and intention. So when you start to boil things down, those are the 4. So I wanted to take one at a time. And the first one I want to talk about is humility. And I want to tell you a little bit about that. One of the things that I've seen, and especially when I'm studying leaders or I'm working with great leaders, is that they all have this trait. And this trait is not to say it is, oh, I'm humble and I'm meek and I'm mild. No, what it means is that you are, I guess the best way to explain it is you're self-aware. But let me put this in context, especially for people that are hiring other people or building teams. When you're building a team, what you really need is a set of skill sets that complement each other. And the humility comes into that part when you're hiring somebody that has strengths that you don't possess. And if you've ever listened to anything that whether it's Maxwell or Robbins or any of these guys say, is never compare your weaknesses to somebody else's strengths. But when you're hiring and building a team, it's exactly what you need to do. And, as a quick story, when I worked at York International, I had the great fortune to work with, to build their enterprise content management team. And I'll never forget, I had a great mentor there, and he came, and I remember we were at a coffee shop called Sparky & Clark's having coffee. And he said, Tim, you got the approval to hire now and build this team, but he's like, you need to decide what you want to do, number one, and what you're good at, and then what you're going to bring other people in to do. And it was really a crossroads in my own career to say, like, all right, I'm going to lead the team and not be the developer. And I always fancied myself as pretty technical and could get things done, but at that moment, it did change my life. And I said, I'm going to lead the team and I'm going to hire better developers, because at the end of the day, I knew that wasn't my true strength. But it was a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, because I had to say, I need better people than me to build this team in these areas. And I know I'm not the best in these areas, so I'm going to hire people better than me. And it was kind of my first touch, I didn't know it at the time, but with the humility and the self-awareness to know that I'm going to bring people on that are better than me. And that's become my mantra when I hire, is to say I'm bringing people on that are smarter than I am in given areas. And it doesn't matter if they're recent grads or if they're seasoned professionals. I know you have to know what you're good at, and you have to know what the skills and strengths of the people you're bringing in are, and that and allow them to do the work the way they need to do it. So again, that's a little bit about humility in my own life in a positive way. And that team went on to do great things, and was always really proud of the work and the way that team rallied around each other to provide services. Now, when more recently, one other story here, and we'll keep going about humility. I've witnessed a lot of leaders where they don't have this, and I want to talk about the consequence of not having humility. So not so long ago, I was helping a startup and a company out of Chicago, and we had when I was brought in there to in essence be the COO. I don't remember what my exact title, VP of something or other, but the job was really to help operationalize the organization. So when I went in there, I looked around and I looked at the talented people in that organization. I said, "This is fantastic." You got a lot of heavy hitters, and one gentleman in particular was I don't know if he was an editor or a writer for the Chicago Tribune, and that gentleman had the gift of literacy, but he had the gift of writing. I mean, that guy could, it was a true gift and truly wonderful to watch and read his work. So one day, CEO comes in, and this guy doesn't have an ounce of humility. Says, "Hey, we need a press release for our new product, for this new offering we're doing." And I said, "Great, I'll work with John. We'll get it banged out." John and I worked on it. We outlined it. John wrote it. Did a fantastic job with it. And right before I was about to submit it, because I thought it was great, John's like, "You got to run it by the CEO." And I'm like, "Okay." And I was still pretty new at the time, and it was probably one of the most jarring things that I had to witness, because the CEO just tore it apart and belittled myself and especially John, the fact that he couldn't write, and just dismantled it. And it wasn't for the content, because the content was spot on for the product. Long story short, that CEO wrote it himself because he thought he was the best author, writer, whatever you want to call it, in that organization, and then without even having it reviewed, submitted it to the Newswire with errors and omissions, and just an awful piece. And the side effect of doing that, not only does it demoralize your staff, it just truly shows the true character of who you are. And that was kind of my first taste in that job, that there was a far bigger problem in that organization than I was led to believe. So, when you're taking these things on, when you're looking at them and saying, "Hey, let me bring people in. Let me show people that are and allow them to work so that they can do their job, so they can exercise and grow their skill sets and what their talent and passion are." That's true humility. And you have to let go of the fact that they're better than you. That's exactly what you want. So when you start to take a look at your leadership, the question you need to ask yourself is, do I have the humility to let others be better than myself? So the other thing I want to leave everybody with today is just a quick story about leadership and the impact, because this was kind of embodies the situation in Chicago. But one of the things that the story. Well, let me tell the story and then we'll wrap it up. I guess that's easier to do. So there's a bunch of little frogs going through the woods one day, and they're all happy-go-lucky, and frogs are generally happy animals, I guess. But anyway, two frogs fall into this great big pit and they can't get out. And so all the other little frogs crowd around the pit. They say, "Hey, how are we gonna get our pals out?" And after what seemed like days, they realized there's no rescuing the little frogs in there. So they started to shout down into the pit, saying, "Hey, prepare for your death because you can't get out. But the two little frogs started jumping, and they were jumping and getting higher. But as they jumped, the crowd of frogs on the top of the rim of this pit yelled louder, "You can't get out. Don't try. Just accept your fate. You can't do it." And one little frog listened to them, and he died. The other little frog, though, kept jumping and jumping, and with each one, he's getting higher and higher. And the crowd of little frogs, they just shouted louder, "You can't get out. You just can't get out." And finally, on his last jump, with all of the strength that he had left, he made it out of the pit miraculously. And all the little frogs gathered around him and celebrating the fact that he got out. And they said, "But didn't you hear us? We said you couldn't get out." And that frog said, "Well, I'm pretty much deaf. I can't hear good. And I never thought you were saying I couldn't get out. I thought you were encouraging me." Point of the story is that leaders, that's our job. Even when things seem impossible, when it's the darkest hour, when you don't think somebody can do something, it's amazing what the power of encouragement and support will allow somebody to do and achieve. So that's the podcast for today. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you, or you'll hear from us again next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Tim Fives, 5 Squared.
Thank you so much for listening to the show with your host, Tim Fives. We hope you will pass along our web address, 5squared.com, to your friends and colleagues. Be sure to check out our archives section on our website for previous podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at 5squared or follow us on Facebook. This has been a 5 Squared production. Join us next time for another edition of the 5 Squared Podcast.